Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan, Rough Motor City Madmouth, and we are getting ready for the 2022 NFL Draft. Tonight's edition of the Sports Exchange is presented by the South Florida Tribune, and we have a three-man booth tonight, and I'm very delighted with the three-man crew, including myself. And we'll lead it off with our sports writer, Greg Fuchs. Welcome back, Greg.
Glad to be here, Scott and JB.
And there's JB. No, I don't know how to do the Johnny Carson thing, but here's JB Ellis. Welcome back.
Thanks. How's it going tonight, guys?
All right. Well, you know what? One of the big pressing positions that you always talk about during the NFL draft are the quarterbacks. And we've already done 2 quarterback carousels, but now the third one that we're going to do, obviously, will be very, very, very impactful, because there are a lot of teams that really need quarterbacks despite some of the movement. And with that said, we're going to let Greg Fuchs take over for a moment and go over the story that he wrote that can be seen on the South Florida Tribune. Take it away, Greg.
Thank you, Scott. And as you mentioned, since the NFL season ended, there's been several big-name quarterbacks who've been traded, some lesser-name quarterbacks who've been signed as free agents. But sitting here on the eve of the NFL draft, there's still a half dozen or maybe more teams who I think still have quarterback issues. Some you can argue they need someone for this season, and the rest of them may be more looking down the road. So maybe they draft them this year, have them develop. Maybe they start halfway through the season, but more of a starter for the 2023 season. Now, when you look at those teams, the 2 teams that jump out to me that really need a quarterback for this season are Seattle and Carolina. I mean, unless you're a fan of Drew Lock and Sam Darnold, those teams need quarterbacks, okay? So what do? Do they trade for somebody? Do they draft somebody? Or do they just roll the dice on those 2 guys I mentioned and address the quarterback situation next year? Don't know. We're going to find out. One thing that's unique about the draft this year in the NFL to me is there doesn't seem to be any consensus on anybody who the first pick in the draft is going to be. How do you rate the 5 supposedly best quarterbacks in the draft? Offensive linemen. You get some guys going first, and that same guy is going 10th in another mock. So getting back to the quarterbacks, though, Carolina drafts 6th in the draft. One of the consensuses that people do seem to agree on is there is no quarterback in this year's draft that is worthy of a top 10 pick. Doesn't mean that someone won't go in the top 10. They're just not that high on them. And Carolina doesn't pick again until the 4th round. So they have a big decision to make. And they would like to trade down, supposedly, but it seems like all the teams want to trade down, and there's no players really out there that excite people that want teams to trade up. Seattle, they're picking 9th, I think. They got to replace Russell Wilson. I can't imagine Pete Carroll at his age wants to go with Drew Lock. So do they draft somebody? We shall see. Couple quarterbacks that are out there for trade. I don't think Kyler Murray is getting traded anywhere. I mean, the Cardinals picked up his 5th-year option today. So I think he is off the market. In terms of Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo, I think those are fallback options, and I don't think anybody is going to make a move on them until after the draft, or at least after the first day of the draft. And I think a lot of teams are hoping the Browns just release Baker Mayfield, because he's got like a $19 million guaranteed contract. And that's a lot of money for someone like him. All right, so who's available in the draft? Well, there's 5 quarterbacks. Like I said, there's no consensus on them. I have seen mock drafts where any one of these 5 has been the first quarterback off the board. All right. Now, the 2 consensus top quarterbacks, if you want to call it a consensus, is Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett. Malik Willis is the guy with the super strong arm, great pair of legs, very mobile, but very raw. Kenny Pickett, on the other hand, played 4 years at Pittsburgh. He's got a lot of football. He is ready to hit the ground running, probably can be a day 1 starter. I have seen him play several times, and when I watched him play, I always said, there's a guy who can play quarterback in the NFL. Now, is he a top 10 quarterback in the NFL? Probably not, but I think he could be a pretty darn good quarterback, and I would take him over a Baker Mayfield any day, in my opinion. The other quarterbacks that you hear, might go in the first round, probably will go in the second. You've got Sam Howell from North Carolina. You've got Matt Corral from Ole Miss. And you got Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. I think you could see some of the other teams that maybe are looking for a quarterback to start halfway through the season or maybe next year. You got Atlanta picking 8. They have Mariota as their quarterback. He's not a long-term solution. Washington traded for Wentz. I can't imagine they would pick a quarterback at 11. They might want to see how good Wentz works out first. You got New Orleans, who signed Winston to a 2-year deal, but they're picking 16 and 19. I think they'll use one of those 2 picks on a quarterback. And the Steelers have Mitch Trubisky. I think he's just a 1-year filler. They're picking 20th. Is there a quarterback who's going to be available at 20 that they like? I don't know. So, that's like a high-level overview of the article I wrote, and there's a lot of way all these teams could go in terms of the quarterback position.
All right, so when we look at and break this whole situation down, we were talking about Atlanta and Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett potentially going there if they're daring enough at 6 to go ahead. So, Jamie, give me your thoughts about Atlanta and whether or not those guys would be a realistic option for the Falcons.
I mean, for the Falcons at 6, it's tough. Like Greg said, this is probably one of the weirdest draft classes I can remember. There's no consensus favorites. There's nobody that is out there, like we've had the last couple of years with Joe Burrow and, Sunshine in Jacksonville that, you want to be number 1 so you can get them. Right now you could take any of these guys. So Atlanta definitely needs to do something to get off of Mariota. But I think back to a couple of years ago with Justin Herbert. He was the, 3rd quarterback pick. He wasn't a consensus. You had to get him. It was, all right, well, if he falls to us and the Chargers got really lucky in getting him, he comparable to Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow got a little bit luckier to get to the Super Bowl, but Herbert's stats have been phenomenal over his first couple of years. So, one of these guys could be that guy. We don't know. That's the great thing about the draft.
Yeah, I think when you look at the fact that I do agree with you, Greg, that I don't see Pete Carroll as the type of guy that would really want to develop a guy at this stage of the game, but you just never know. Here's a guy that took Russell Wilson. We all know he wasn't a first-round pick. It was Matt Flynn, I think, was signed by Seattle, big money, and all of a sudden you draft Russell Wilson. We know how that turned out, but you never know. I mean, is he really going to be content with Drew Lock? Or, we talk about Baker Mayfield going to Seattle. I mean, there's a lot of different things that'll play out. And I do agree with you guys, okay, that no moves will be made until after the draft or maybe even the day 2. I actually think you guys are right. I don't see any veteran quarterback moving until after the draft. So, Greg, why don't you pick up on that?
Yeah, I think, and part of the issue with Mayfield is, even if he was to resolve all of his sort of locker room, off-field issues, whatever you want to call it, he still isn't, in my opinion, a top 15 quarterback. Is he better than Sam Darnold? Yes, he's better than Sam Darnold. He's better than Drew Lock. So if those teams wanted to bring him in for like a 1-year fix, that I get. I don't think they're going to want to give up a lot of draft capital, or they're not going to want to pick up his $19 million salary cap hit. That's for sure. So Mayfield will end up somewhere because the Browns aren't going to pay Deshaun Watson $35-40 million a year and Mayfield $19 million. So Mayfield will end up somewhere. Might not necessarily be as a starter, but he will go somewhere. Jimmy G, I go back and forth on. He's coming off that shoulder surgery. I think it was his non-throwing shoulder, though. But San Francisco is a Super Bowl potential team. And they're going to want to just totally roll the dice with Trey Lance as their quarterback, or do they want Jimmy G still on that roster to hedge their bets? Because they're not paying Lance a lot of money, so they can afford to have both those guys on the roster. So I can see them keeping that guy. And getting back to Baker, seems like a lot of teams are just leery of him, of what he brings to the locker room.
No, you know what? That's a great point. Sorry, JB. I think I'm going to defer to you in just a moment. Okay.
No worries.
But I agree. Why on heaven's earth would the 49ers even consider letting Garoppolo go right now when you have a unknown commodity in Trey Lance, and that's where you're going to pick it up, JV. Now, I don't see why I would keep Garoppolo another year. I don't understand why everybody's in such a hurry to get rid of a guy who, by the way, you've had success with in the past.
Yeah, I mean, for the 49ers to trade Jimmy G, it would have to be something so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like Greg said again, I mean, they're legitimately in contention to go to the Super Bowl this year. They didn't, do anything that would hurt them. They got Debo who wants to get traded right now. So, they are going to be hurting a little bit, but on the offensive side. But at the same time, they still have a really deep team to trade the starting quarterback, especially that Lance is under the rookie contract still. There's no financial worries by doing that. I just don't see them doing it. It doesn't make much sense. They'd have to have something that would just blow them away to get rid of Jimmy G, in my opinion.
Oh, I agree. And now let's address the Cardinals for a moment, because I know you talked about that, Greg, earlier. You bring on Kyler Murray, so it's almost like you admitted that you made a mistake because you had Josh Rosen, who you drafted a year. So I don't even think Josh Rosen got a fair opportunity to do anything with the Cardinals. But yet, meanwhile, you bring on Kyler Murray, and we all know about the Kyler Murray connection with Cliff Kingsbury. But yeah, so if they picked up their option, that's fine. I mean, Kyler Murray will ultimately get paid. Main thing he has to do is stay healthy. The Cardinals have their franchise quarterback, and I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of a year Kyler Murray does have going on this year, hoping that he stays healthy and that he has enough horses around him so that they can go ahead and make a little bit of progress and get past that first playoff game. So anything you want to add? I mean, Josh Rosen, I hate to say this, guys, got a raw deal in the NFL. And some quarterbacks are just going to get a raw deal, and you always wonder what if with Josh Rosen. Would anybody say that he was an NFL bust? I'll tell you right now, I would say no. And I'm going to ask both of you guys a question, okay? JB, we're going to start with you. What do you classify a bust, especially a quarterback in the NFL, JB, a bust?
So I think it depends. I mean, there's obviously getting on the field. If you don't get on the field, you're a bust. That would be automatic. Then after that, you look at the stats. I'm not a huge stat person. I'm more of a feel because, I'm a Giant fan. Eli Manning's stats were not the greatest in the world, but, I think, he was a really good quarterback. He just played to his competition. So, that's why I don't really like to look at stats as the main thing. But it's hard to classify. I think it's just something you have to watch. And if you're drafted in the top 5 as a quarterback and you're not starting and you don't get opportunity and you can't hold the job, to me, that would make you a bust.
What about you, Greg?
Yeah, to me, a bust is someone who was very highly thought of before the draft. Someone who probably goes in the top 15. All right. So Josh Rosen was picked at number 10. Was he the 10th best player in the draft? Probably not. But quarterbacks always go higher than they should. But when you're picked 10th, expectations are high. And to your point, did he ever get a really fair chance? No. He went from team to team, a lot of times not through his own fault. Different coach every year, different offensive coordinator every year. I mean, the Dolphins picked him up. They gave him a 2nd and a 5th for him. They wanted him to be the solution, and they started him a handful of games. But between those games and what they saw in practice, I think they saw enough to say, this guy is not the answer. Then he went to Tampa, and you thought maybe Tom Brady would take him under his wing and teach him something, but that didn't last long. And then he went where? San Francisco? Is he still in San Francisco? I can't remember where he went.
I believe he's now with Atlanta.
Yeah.
I believe he's with Atlanta now.
So he's been all over. He seems like a good guy. I would love to have a happy ending. But something just tells me he just doesn't have what it takes to be an NFL quarterback.
All right, so I'm going to throw a name at you guys, okay? Ready? Joey Harrington, bust or no bust, JB?
Wow. That's a tough one.
Okay.
I don't remember when he got drafted, what his
Well, he was the third pick overall when he in his draft class.
yeah.
Does that help you?
He was with Detroit, and that's
And then he ended up going to the Miami Dolphins, and then he ultimately landed on with New Orleans and didn't get any time. But yeah, he was drafted by the Lions, and actually got even with the Lions on Thanksgiving Day when he whipped them one time when he went up there. But that'll be another story. But go ahead, JB.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. Thinking about it, because he really, for being a top 3 pick, he didn't really produce anything. It's tough. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at what he did, but right now I would say yeah.
What about you, Greg?
Yeah, as a number 3 pick in the draft, high expectations, but he wasn't a bust because he wasn't terrible. I mean, he played a long time in the NFL, threw some touchdown passes. So was he a great quarterback? No. Was he even a good quarterback? Probably not. But he was decent enough to at least void the bust tag.
And I'll tell you right now, firsthand, because I was around it, he was not a bust. You know why? Marty Morningweg was his first coach. Oh, that's great. Head coach, by the way. Things aren't going bad. The guy goes over and rides his motorcycle off into the sunset because he was angry with his team in practice. And if that wasn't good enough, you got Steve Mariucci, right? Okay, who's supposed to fix him with his reputation in San Francisco. Didn't work out there either. So now, not only are you changing the head coaches, then you're changing the offensive coordinators. And you're going to blame that on a quarterback? And I'm not saying you guys are, but you're going to do that? Well, what's the biggest pet peeve with quarterbacks that turn them into busts? Change the head coach too many times, change the offensive coordinator, and you know what that's called? A recipe of disaster. That's what it really is, which is why I don't classify Harrington as a bust. And, you know, having worked as a member of Detroit sports media like I have for a lot of years, you know, covering him on the road and off the road, I think that Harrington avoids the bust thing. So, but, you know, again, that's a term that's a lot of people are going to talk about when you talk about quarterbacks in the draft. Are they a bust? And time will tell. You know, we talk about where they come out of school sometimes. Nobody gave Josh Allen a prayer coming out of the University of Wyoming. Guess what? He turned out pretty good. So as we go through this a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of these other quarterbacks that you mentioned, Greg, okay, that we talked about the fact that Murray wanted to remain a Cardinal. But like you alluded to, you got Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Devontae Adams, and Tyreek Hill being traded. You wonder, could anything happen? Well, it's safe to say, you know, those trades happen for a specific reason. And then we go address the Jimmy Garoppolo thing. Again, I think San Francisco should keep the guy. I really do. And you know full well that Jimmy Garoppolo is not getting traded to Seattle because they're not going to go out there and trade him within the division and have to deal with that. So, you know, again, the surgery is obviously a question mark here. But, you know, let's talk about Washington a little bit. There are some, what are they drafting? I believe the 11th pick. And you've talked about New Orleans 16th and Pittsburgh and Detroit. So let's break down each situation. And we'll start with you, JB. Of these signal callers, who do you think might be the best fit for the Commanders?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Rivera tends to do well with athletic quarterbacks. You know, so, I mean, Cam Newton was really phenomenal when he played with him in Carolina. You know, I think looking at it, I'll be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to go over the quarterbacks very much. I haven't looked over the draft as much as I wish I would have had.
That's all right.
At this point. But, you know, I think for Washington, that their best move would be to get an athletic quarterback, because that Rivera had the most success with Newton out of anybody that he's had.
Well, that's fair, because what you're really doing right now is you're talking about Malik. Obviously, we're talking about Malik Willis, right? And Liberty, I believe, is located right in their backyard anyways, isn't it? Not exactly sure where Liberty is, but I think it's in that neck of the woods. I think they're in Virginia, aren't they? So, yeah, that follows in what you're saying, that, you know, Rivera's used to the mobile quarterback, and that's why I had Cam Newton. So, Greg, I'm going to ask you, who do you think New Orleans should go with 16th and 19th?
I think at least one quarterback will be off the board by the 16th or 19th pick in the draft. Of the 5 quarterbacks that are thought of as possible first-round picks, I still defer to Kenny Pickett. mean, I know he's got the small hand stigma, and he did fumble a lot in college. Like I said earlier, I saw him play several times in college, and he just seemed like an NFL quarterback to me. He had a good presence, a good arm. He's not Lamar Jackson when it comes to running, but he's a fairly mobile quarterback. I think he had 5 rushing touchdowns last year. And he just seems like a guy, maybe not his rookie season. I think it could be middle of the pack, top 12, top 15 quarterback.
Okay, well, that's fine. So you're thinking New Orleans could go after him. And now a lot of Steeler fans are hoping that the same doesn't happen. Once upon a time when Dan Marino could have been a Pittsburgh Steeler, we know how that worked out. It didn't, and they haven't heard the end of it. But I would love to see Pickett personally go to the Pittsburgh Steelers because, after all, they share the same complex anyways. On one end you have the Panthers, on one hand you have the Steelers, so it's not like you have any gas costs involved from going on one side of the complex or the other. I would love to see the Steelers land Kenny Pickett if he were to drop that far. I don't know if he will, or whether they elect to trade up to get him, but Kenny Pickett would make the most sense there. Now the wild card, okay, I know the Lions aren't going to draft a quarterback, at least I hope not, at number 2. My hope is that they'll draft Aiden Hutchinson and that the Jaguars take on Trayvon Walker out of Georgia. Makes sense, like we talked about the other night, right, Greg? How Trayvon Walker, the Georgia guy, okay, staying in the Southeastern Conference neck of the woods. Aiden Hutchinson, Big Ten territory. But I've heard a couple different names there, and the one that appears to come to mind for Detroit is Matt Corral, who was coached by former FAU coach Lane Kiffin. So I've heard that. I think Matt Corral makes sense, and Sam Howell, I think, is another name that I've heard there as well. You guys have what are your thoughts about those possibilities?
Go ahead, JB.
I mean, Jacksonville getting the number 1 pick after taking Trevor Lawrence last year, it's tough being in that spot because the number 1 pick is usually a quarterback or a big name player. Detroit, the number 2 has Goff, and I don't think he's the greatest thing, but I don't know if I'd want to go out and get a quarterback with this group. Detroit has other needs that they could definitely go after. So I think there's a lot of trades maybe for trading down, but there's not as much value to trade up. It's just the oddest draft. When you look at the way that the class is.
Well, I'll say this much about the Lions, okay? The last time they had a nasty player, okay, that they drafted with number 2, I believe, and Ndamukong Suh got picked. Wouldn't it be interesting if Aiden Hutchinson was Mr. Nasty with his prowess on that defensive end, being an edge rusher, being selected number 2? I remember when the Lions got Ndamukong Suh. I don't care how dirty he was or the body slamming quarterbacks like he did with Aaron Rodgers. We all know how that worked out, that they had to cover him every which way but loose, when it came to going to the principal's office. But I could see the Lions drafting a quarterback at 32, and I can tell you why I could see that. I mean, once again, I'm hoping Aiden Hutchinson goes number 2 and that Trayvon Walker goes to Jacksonville. But here's the thing. Acquire Jared Goff. So it's only fitting that not only do you get Jared Goff, okay, but you get a quarterback as one of those picks anyhow. So you have Stafford for really basically 2 quarterbacks, right? You have Jared Goff and his successor, if you see how the dynamics play out. So, again, Desmond Ridder has been talked about, but I could see Matt Corral or Sam Howell being the 2 that could go to Detroit, but we'll find out. At least I know day 1, the Lions they did get some good draft capital from the Stafford trade by any means. And you guys may think I'm crazy, but when they made the Stafford-Goff trade, I thought they could have made that trade straight up. But again, the key here with but that shows you how smarter Brad Holmes, the Lions general manager, is he got draft capital, eat a little salary, deal with the Goff contract situation for a couple of years, and you got. So we know Brad Holmes is a very shrewd general manager by all means. And when you talk about the Cleveland situation, you know that when they go ahead and get rid of Mayfield, they're going to have to eat some salary and get whatever pick they can get. But on to what we're talking about, the Lions. I think the Lions should take a pick at 32, and I think, back end of the first round, you can do it. And we got other quarterbacks where you get to away. We would scratch the surface on what I consider the sleeper. You guys want to add to the Lions at 32, or are you guys comfortable with what he talked about?
I mean, the only thing I want to add is, I think most football fans think Goff is not a long-term answer. And I assume, I don't know for sure, Detroit has their own second-round pick this year. So they can afford to take a quarterback in the first round. Then that way you got 5 years to develop them as a first-round pick, and they can still get someone real good at another position early in the second round.
Yeah, but I want to caution people in Detroit one thing, okay? Number one, the Lions only won 3 games last year. But you know what? I know there's talk about Deebo Samuel. A lot of people wanted him to be traded somewhere. I don't believe that John Lynch is going to let him go anyhow. But here's the thing. Before you start getting rid of Jared Goff, why don't you surround this guy with some targets, for crying out loud? Get Jared Goff a couple of decent running backs. I'm not saying great, decent I'll settle for, number one. And why don't you give him some quality wide receivers before you start going ahead and writing Jared Goff off? And then
he had all of that in Los Angeles, and Sean McVay said, I don't want you. Get me someone else.
Well, but you got Matt Stafford, who led you to the Super Bowl. So, what can you say? Matt Stafford obviously got buried in Detroit, and it was too bad that the Lions couldn't win with him. But we're on to the present. Give Jared Goff some targets, for crying out loud. How do you make a legitimate evaluation, JB, if the guy has a very limited deck when it comes to playmakers, whether it is running backs or tight ends, or TJ Hawkinson's their best playmaker, but wide receivers, I know they picked up DJ Chark during the offseason, but go ahead, JB.
Goff got the Rams to the Super Bowl a few years back, so I don't think, he's a bad quarterback by any means. Stafford is better, but, Goff is serviceable. The Lions aren't getting to the Super Bowl anytime soon. Why spend all that money and bring somebody in until you have all the other chips in place? That's just, if you don't have all the other chips, getting the best quarterback right now, if you get Tom Brady on that team tomorrow, you're not winning a Super Bowl anyway. So, build up everything around. The Lions are actually in a great position. I loved what they did last year. They showed a lot of life. You haven't seen that in Detroit for a while. They were playing hungry. They were playing great football. For the Lions, at least. They weren't, a top team, but they were exciting to watch. They were in every game, and they fought. Build up the pieces that you need, and then from there, when you find the quarterback you really want, then you go get him. Until then, you have Jared Goff. He's going to win you football games.
Well, let's face the reality. Everybody wants to play for Dan Campbell, for crying out loud. I think he's going to be a fine coach but I'm glad he got a 6-year contract because he knew what he was getting into. And, the results weren't bad. I know they tied against the Steelers. At least they didn't have to worry about going 0-17. And they added a few wins later on in the year as well. But so Dan Campbell, kneecaps or no kneecaps, and the fact that they'll be on Hard Knocks, yeah, who wouldn't want to play for him? So I totally agree with you 100%, JB. Go ahead, Greg.
The big thing any general manager has to answer is, when it comes to the quarterback position, far and away the most important position in all of sports. And if you want to win a Super Bowl, you need to have the right quarterback. Now, do I think Jared Goff is that guy? I don't think he is, even though he did get to a Super Bowl. I have a feeling Detroit management doesn't think he is either. But the thing about these 5 quarterbacks in this year's draft, does anybody think any of them have the magic to get you to the Super Bowl? They all could be a starter in the NFL, one of the best 32, but are they in the top dozen or so that can lead you to a Super Bowl? I don't know if anyone feels that way about any of these guys.
Well, good point. You talk about some of the quarterback class in the past where you thought they were all going to be superstars, and a lot of them aren't working out. So maybe an unheralded group here might turn into a couple of good players. I want to go on to a couple of things very briefly, and we'll continue on. We know about the Commanders and obviously the Saints. Being in a market for them, you can tell where their drafts between 11 pick, and of course we talked about later on. Any suggestions about where those two franchises should go, knowing that Carson Wentz and Jameis Winston, obviously, I would think they're probably in their last leg in terms of starting anyways this year.
Well, Winston is certainly serviceable. He has no problem sitting back in the pocket and winging it. New Orleans has a lot of holes in that roster to fill. They could use offensive linemen because they lost Armstead to the Dolphins. They could use wide receivers. It all depends on how much they like any of these 5 quarterbacks. And of course, you don't know because no one tells the truth around draft time. So if they like one of these 5 guys, grab one of them. If you're not crazy about him, if you don't see him as a long-term top 15 starter in the NFL, go with another position.
Yeah, I think that the Steelers, JB, made a pretty safe decision with Mitchell Trubisky. Give the guy a chance before you write him off. I mean, obviously, Matt Nagy was trying to work with him in Chicago. That was a colossal disaster. At least he goes to Buffalo, has a chance to carry a clipboard under Brian Dable. But I wouldn't be so quick to write off Mitchell Trubisky. This guy could be a lot better than most people think. Go ahead, JB.
I think Trubisky was pretty decent in Chicago. He wasn't great, but he did what he had to do. I think I forget what if it was a Sunday or a Monday night game where Nagy took him out and made up the phantom injury, and Trubisky was standing there, and then they put him back in. I lost all respect for Nagy at that point. You can't make up phantom injuries when there's cameras all around. It's the NFL. It's not Pee Wee football. So I thought that was pretty weird. Trubisky has a decent skill set. He can move. He has a decent arm. He just needs to be coached. The same thing with Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston threw for 30 touchdowns. Yes, 30-plus interceptions as well, but you can coach that. He has talent. You just need to work with him and teach him what needs to be done and what not to do. In the right system, if you can cut down those interceptions, you could be a really good quarterback in the league. Carson Wentz, on the other hand, he lacks mental fortitude. You can't teach that. If you don't have the mental drive to play in the NFL and you don't feel that, if you feel disrespected and you got to sit or you want to leave your team, how could you lead your team if you're looking to get out? That's how the game works. There's always going to be competition for your spot. That guy below you wants your spot. They're going to do whatever they can to get your spot. They're going to try their hardest. And if the coach thinks that they've earned it, they're going to put them in. You can't just quit. You got to fight harder and do better. And he did that in Philadelphia. He went to Indianapolis, and I thought that was a train wreck to begin with. So I would take anybody over Carson Wentz at quarterback. And Washington has a phenomenal defense. They have some decent pieces on offense. With a better quarterback, they can possibly challenge for that division because there's nobody that good in the NFC East.
Good point. And I want to go back to Willis for a moment, if I can. We know, like we alluded to, he's got the mobility, the arm strength, and the athleticism that does excite general managers. And he's raw. And the guy that's calling the shots over with Washington is Martin May, who used to be the Lions general manager as well. So, I know he has a lower floor than a lot of the QBs available, but I know he has the highest ceiling. And I think that going into Washington for Willis is by all means a great fit. Don't you guys agree?
I definitely think that, anytime you can get the guy you think would fit your scheme, or if you're a good enough coach that can change the scheme to fit the guy you like, it's worth taking him. And I think the way Rivera likes his quarterbacks, or at least what he's had while he was with the Panthers, I think that would be a good fit for him.
So who are you saying? What, the Panthers, did you say?
No, the Redskins.
Yeah, Redskins or Commanders or Washington. What? Oh, come on. I'm just giving you a hard time.
It's going to take a while. I hate changes of – I cover the San Diego – see, I just did it again. The Los Angeles Chargers for an NFL show. Yeah. Forever called them San Diego. I don't like the changes in names and cities. No, you're still where you're from, Timmy. But it's
come on. You're just feeling the old relocation blues like everybody else, JB. That's all you are. The man is feeling the relocation blues. The Oakland Raiders, not the Las Vegas Raiders. And then we also talk about the San Diego Chargers. Oops, go right up there a couple of hours. I get it. No, I'm with you. I'm just giving you a hard time. Because you know what? Everybody makes that same mistake. So, yeah, I'm with you all the way. But, I mean, I do believe that Willis and Ron Rivera would be, me personally, an ideal fit there because we can talk about Ron Rivera. Been there, done that with Cam. We'll go from there. Now, on to Pickett. Okay, let's talk about breaking down his numbers a little bit. We talk about having the highest floor of any of the quarterbacks as a 4-year starter at University of Pittsburgh. I'd love to see all quarterbacks go 4 years for that matter. But in his senior year, he amasses 4,319 yards, 42 touchdowns. Plus, he runs for another 233 yards and adds another 5 TDs. And again, I agree with what you say in your article, Greg. He's definitely the most NFL ready of the group. And yeah, I don't care about his small hands. I know he has 27 fumbles. So what? You know what? When you look at the upside, and I'm going to tell you right now, I can agree with you, Greg, that I do believe that he'll be a top 12 QB in a couple of years. Again, an uninspiring class. But again, we've had other ones that appear to be inspiring classes. They're not panning out either. And I won't get into previous classes. So, all right, JB, give me your thoughts about Pickett. Then we have a few more things before we call it a night.
So to me, Pickett is kind of like Allen a few years ago. Everybody was talking about his hand size. He's going to Buffalo. Is he going to be able to hold the ball? And look what he's done. He's probably, surpassed everybody's expectations tenfold, except for Buffalo, who took him, and they've done well taking him. So, I mean, the guy had a phenomenal year. You got to just take a chance. If you when you're watching the film and interviewing these guys, if you feel they fit on your team, you got to go for it. And a place like Carolina, where you got Sam Darnold, who's just not shown where he's capable of leading a team to go anywhere. Not that he's had much of a chance with the Jets. And last year at Carolina wasn't a great year with the injury to McCaffrey and, the lackluster team they had. But, if you feel he's your guy, you got to go for it.
Greg?
Yeah, Pickett to me passes the eye test. Just watching him play in college, like I said earlier, he just seemed like an NFL quarterback. If Carolina was picking 15th in this draft and Pickett was still on the board, I think they'd take him in a heartbeat. I think they're just having a real time convincing themselves to take him at the number 6 pick.
We won't spend much time on this, but I guess I'll call it the curiosity quest. We'll just find out where Matt Corral of Ole Miss, North Carolina, Sam Howell, and Cincinnati's Desmond Ritter wind up. Desmond Ritter had some pretty good success over at the University of Cincinnati, and they took him to the college football playoffs. Now, we'll localize things a little bit. Let's talk about the Miami Dolphins. This one really intrigues me. And of all the things we're going to say here now, folks, okay, you heard it here on the Sports Exchange. By the way, just so you know, the Sports Exchange can be heard on iHeartRadio, and you can also subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel to get the visuals. We encourage you to subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel for all the necessary updates of all the different shows that we have going on here. And you can also find the broadcast on our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. With that said, okay, let's localize it to the Miami Dolphins, okay? They have the 3rd or 4th round pick. They have a 3rd and 4th round because they're going to be sleeping for a while. They've given up a lot of their draft capital. So obviously it looks like pick number 102, right, Greg? Is that what you're talking about here?
That's their first pick.
All right. So Miami.
3rd round.
So they got Teddy Bridgewater in the house, okay? But obviously a 1-year deal. So do you see the Miami Dolphins taking the quarterback at some point during the draft?
Taking one at number 3 or even in the 4th round is probably a bit of a stretch unless one of these guys just plummets in the draft. If Sam Howell's sitting there in the 4th round, because Bridgewater's just here on a 1-year deal. Jury is still out on Tua, so do they draft another quarterback and try and develop him? Possibly. As we discussed on Monday's show, Dolphins have 5 picks in the first 3 rounds of next year's draft. 2 in the first, 1 in the second, 3 in the third. If Tua turns out to not be the answer, they will trade all 5 of those picks for the best quarterback they can get in next year's draft, which is supposed to be a good year for quarterbacks.
JB?
So, yeah, I completely agree that, unless there's somebody that falls to them in their laps in the later rounds, which I can't see any of these guys falling that far, I see no reason to push and try and do something to take a quarterback. I think Tua is going to be decent. You got Bridgewater as well this year. Why force a pick? I mean, when you're taking a quarterback, you have to believe in the guy. Probably the biggest frustration I have is Daniel Jones. I never believed in him, but, the Giants did. And they took him way before they should have. They could have taken him later in the first round, but they went out and they got him because they were worried that their guy wasn't going to be there. That's what you want in your quarterback when you draft him. If you don't feel that way, if you don't have that commitment, then you definitely don't need to take him. You just wait.
All right, so let me ask you a dumb question. Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Ever heard of Joe Montana?
Who?
Yeah. Who? Exactly. Have you?
That guy,
Well,
was he any good? That guy?
yeah, I think it was pretty good. I think it was good for a few Super Bowls, right? Well, once upon a time, since I don't think I read bedtime stories. I never sleep anyway, so this side of the point drives my nuts crazy. My wife nut crazy. But he was drafted third round, University of Notre Dame. Guess what? Did pretty well with 49ers, right? So you don't have to find him in the first round. Ever heard of Tom Brady? Oh, I think he's only good for 7 Super Bowls. Is that all? And guess what? Came from the University of Michigan. Didn't work out so bad, right? So, folks, if you don't get anything out of this broadcast, here's the one thing you are going to get out of this, okay? You want to talk about the word hidden gem, okay? I've got one for you. And Greg Fuchs found that out very quickly Monday night, right, Greg? Say yes.
I did. I bow down to you. I had never heard of this guy.
Okay, well, good. Bow down, whatever you want. Make sure you I'll hopefully that'll be worth 5 or 10 subscribers when I go out there and give every betting expert something to work with that'll listen to this show and watch it, okay? A guy, and I'll tell you why I know a lot more about this guy than most people would, is I'm on the mailing media distribution list for Western Kentucky University. Why? Well, number one, when I was covering FAU, I didn't mind going ahead and getting on some of them because I was always hoping to get the football guy that would feed me information to feed our broadcast and also build our followers. Bailey Zappi, Zappe, Boca Raton Bowl offensive MVP, Conference USA MVP 2001, 4-year college career. He actually was in college 5 years, 4 at Houston Baptist, 1 at Western Kentucky, was redshirted 1 year. Okay. Now, Bailey Zappi is 6 foot, 220 pounds. Once upon a time, a guy by the name of Drew Brees, 6 foot, 209 pounds. Here are the numbers for Bailey Zappi, folks, okay, for Western Kentucky in 2021. 687 attempts, 476 completions, 5,967 yards, 62 touchdowns. Let me repeat that again. 62 touchdowns against 11 interceptions. If that isn't good enough, let me give you his cumulative yardage total. 14,433 yards, 135 touchdowns, 40 interceptions, completion 1,225, attempts 1,897. Folks, that is a mouthful of stats. This guy here might be better than any quarterback that we just mentioned on the 5. And again, I learned about him firsthand because I got the information. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't, me personally, if the Lions had any sense and he's still available, don't even draft a quarterback, okay, late in the first round. Get on the Zap train instead. And I think he'd be an ideal pick. But I think he'll work out anywhere. Plus, he's possibly a second or third day pick. You know, so I think this is a guy that everybody should be paying attention to. All right, Greg, since you ate humble pie and didn't know much about him, okay, it's okay for everybody to eat humble pie on the show every once in a while. What have you learned about Bailey Zapp over the last 72 hours since we've been talking about?
I literally had never heard of this guy at any point in my life. All right. Don't remember him playing in college. All the mock draft and stuff you hear on ESPN, I never even heard his name mentioned until today, by the way. I did hear him mentioned today. I mean, those yardage and TDs you threw last season were the most in the history of NCAA. Now, granted, it was in the Conference USA, which isn't exactly the SEC, but those are still amazing stats. The big game he had last year against legit competition was Michigan State. I think he threw for 450 plus yards and 4 touchdowns. And, you know, I read some scouting reports on him. This is what they say about him. Here's the pros. Great touch, calm in the pocket, great pocket awareness. He's a leader, and he's very accurate. The only negatives, average arm strength, and he's not a tremendous runner. That reminds me of Drew Brees. Now, is he going to be Drew Brees? Chances are he isn't, but he seems to have a lot of the intangibles that other quarterbacks don't. He has all the intangibles that Malik Willis doesn't. And surprising to me when I looked them up, it said Bailey Zappi's 6'1", 215. Malik Willis is only 6'1", 219. They're the same size. And most Pickett, I think, is 6'3". The rest of the quarterbacks in this year's draft are like 6'1" or 6 feet. You know, and a lot of the quarterbacks in the NFL recently are not that tall. I think the NFL's gotten over having a 6'5" quarterback. Yeah, it's great. If you got a Herbert or a Josh Allen, that is fantastic. But this guy is definitely, in my mind, worth rolling the dice on. And they had him projected, and I'm not sure how long ago this article was written, in the 6th round. That seems way too late for me. And the one thing I heard, the reason I heard him today on ESPN, they still do those Wonderlic tests for the draft picks. And out of all the quarterbacks, he had the highest score.
Well, it's funny how you talk about the height. I heard he was like 6 foot, 220 somewhere else, and you get an updated. So maybe where I got it, and they must have updated it after the combine. I don't know. Doesn't matter. 6 foot, 6'1", it doesn't matter. And I like what you say, average arm strength. You know what? Nowadays, if you can throw the ball and get 10, 15 yards, sometimes yards after the catch, JB, factor into it. So I don't know if I put too much stock in average arm strength, but evidently he compiles up a lot of yards. And more importantly, he's going to come cheap during that rookie contract as well. Take it from there, JB.
How can you go wrong on a guy that threw for almost 6,000 yards?
Yeah.
And, I mean, on top of that, you know, the Michigan State game, 488. So he did it against the top 25 team, you know, one of the better teams in the country. I wouldn't have a problem taking him. Worst case scenario, if you don't like him, you get him as a late pick. You don't keep all your picks anyway. You cut a bunch of them. You put them on the practice squad. It's worth a flyer if you need a quarterback on your team just to see. Can't go wrong.
I agree. Well, so there you have it, folks. Now we gave you some quarterbacks to think about come tomorrow night. The draft obviously will be going on at 8:00 Eastern time out in Las Vegas. So here we are 24 hours later, and now we've given you a bunch of quarterbacks to think about. So
hey, one other thing on the quarterback that I just heard about in the last day or two, another team that may take a quarterback in the first round, Tennessee Titans.
Interesting.
I found surprising, but they're picking like 27th. And maybe that tells you what they think about Tannehill long term.
Good. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I hadn't heard that brought up before. I know that
2 different mocks had them taking a quarterback in the first round.
Well, because you mentioned that, I'll pay attention to it now. I really will, Greg. I'll be very curious to see if the Titans do get involved with I haven't heard much about the Titans. I know that a lot of people weren't happy that Ryan Tannehill couldn't take him further in last year's playoffs, but not to a point where I've heard anything. And I don't put a lot of stock in mock drafts because they don't factor in trades anyways. I think mock drafts for me are nothing more to give us guys in the media a chance to talk about them. But to me, a mock is considered a hypothesis. I call it an educated guess because that's all it is an educated guess. All right, folks, as you know, the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morgan, Roth Motor City Madmouth. Pleased to be joined by Greg Fuchs, writer for the South Florida Tribune, and JB Ellis of the program. So great broadcast. Really had a lot of fun with all of us, you know, keeping it intimate amongst the three of us. You know, we have a lot of things that we can talk about. You know, we've done 3, 4, 5-man booths. They're all good. They're all efficient, everybody. But you know what? I have no problem with the 3-man booth at all. They do it in football anyways, Monday night, nationally televised. And now we did it tonight. So any closing thoughts about the quarterback situation, JB?
You know, I'm excited that my Giants probably going to be just as bad next year. So we're going to have a shot to get another quarterback to replace Daniel Jones. Good luck to everyone that gets a quarterback this year. You know, there's a bunch of good ones. I don't know at this point who I think is going to be the best looking at what I've seen. But, you know, somebody will be out there and you'll say, wow, look at that guy. You know, we'll see that in a few months.
Greg?
I'm going to predict none of them go in the top 10 and only 2 go in the first round.
And I'm going to say that considering it's an uninspired class, that I hope that because it's an uninspired class that are underdogs, that some of these guys do better than the inspired classes because we know how that's worked out. So, but that said, I want to reiterate that South Florida Tribune, obviously, you can subscribe to iHeartRadio to get the audio version. And you can also go ahead and find it on the website, www.southfloridatribune.com, and more importantly, the YouTube channel. Programming note, too, by the way, debuting on Friday, April 29th, Fire Up Florida with myself, Greg Fuchs, and Mark Mancini. And also, if you want to advertise for the show, feel free to call us at 954-304-4941. And our Twitter, you can find us there at Tribune South. So with that said, okay, Greg, why don't you give everybody a brief idea how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, I write for southfloridatribune.com, so you can get my articles there. And you can follow me on Twitter at GFuchs, at Gregory Fuchs.
JB?
JB _ the program on Twitter. Sideline Sports Tuesday night, 8:30 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Confidential Tuesdays at 11. Here Wednesdays, and both sides of the coin Wednesday at 11 every other week.
And finally, I'll go over our information one last time. Twitter at Tribune South. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Scott Morganroth on LinkedIn. Be more than happy to connect with you if you're a professional. Like to get to know people out there. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. Mention the Twitter at Tribune South. Please subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. You'll get all the notifications there, and you also can hear us on iHeartRadio. And a shout out to my wife, Candy Ebling, does a phenomenal job keeping it all together. So lots of ways through emailing us, southfloridatribune@gmail.com, the website, www.southfloridatribune.com, Twitter at Tribune South, and please subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. So meanwhile, we hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Sports Exchange. So on behalf of Greg Fuchs and JB Ellis, my name is Scott Morganroth. Thank you for joining us, and we will catch you the next time. God bless everybody. I don't know about you guys. I'm looking, now that we've got all these quarterbacks out there, I'm looking forward to seeing over the next few days that some of these guys have new homes. We're going to find out in no time. So once again, folks, it's going to be a very eventful weekend with the NFL draft. They do it in 3 days. Once upon a time, I used to cover them I've covered the draft actually for the Miami Dolphins, Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Lions. So I have a pretty good idea of what goes on, but boy, it's a much different situation all the time. So meanwhile, folks, thanks again for joining us. We'll catch you the next time. Have a good night, and please be safe. Good evening, everybody.